The lights went out in Havana, and they have not come back. Now the United States has handed Cuba a clock. 14 days. Not a request, not an opening offer. A deadline, with a carrier strike group 90 miles offshore to make sure no one mistakes it for a suggestion. If you track what's actually happening in Cuba beyond the headlines, hit like right now. It's the fastest signal to get this analysis in front of people who need it. On April 17th, a U.S. diplomatic delegation landed in Havana. They came with 2 assistant secretaries of state, Treasury officials, and a senior advisor from the National Security Council. Cuba sent deputy foreign ministers. According to the New York Times, what followed was not a negotiation. It was a presentation of terms. 10 specific demands, 14 days to begin implementing them. And a State Department official told reporters something that should have stopped every newsroom in the world. The window for negotiation had closed. Stay with me, because the list of demands tells you something the headlines will not. Here is what the United States put on the table. Release every political prisoner detained since February, the protest leaders, the journalists, the artists who disappeared into custody. Allow independent political parties to operate freely. Open the energy sector to private investment. Hold elections monitored by international observers. Dismantle the state security apparatus used to suppress dissent. Read each demand alone, and it sounds like a Western policy wish list. Read them together, and something becomes clear. This is not a reform package. This is a blueprint for dissolving the Cuban system of government, function by function, without ever calling it regime change. The Communist Party loses its monopoly on politics. The state loses its grip on energy. The security apparatus that enforces every other element disappears. A Cuba that accepts all 10 conditions is not a Cuba the party controls. Secretary of State Marco Rubio understands this. These demands were not written to be partially accepted. They were written to be accepted in full or rejected in full, because partial compliance gives Washington nothing it can claim as a victory. Share this with anyone following Cuba right now, because what comes next is the part the press conference version leaves out. Cuba's response, delivered by Deputy Director Alejandro Garcia del Toro, was careful to the point of being surgical. He confirmed the meeting. He called the energy embargo illegal under international law. He said Cuba was ready to discuss bilateral relations. He never said the word 14. He never acknowledged the specific demands. That silence is not an accident. It is a strategy this situation has produced before. Acknowledge the channel. Ignore the terms. Because publicly accepting the terms is surrender, and publicly rejecting them closes the only open door. The silence may not hold for long. While diplomats spoke in Havana, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the USS Winston Churchill and the USS Kearney, were patrolling the Straits of Florida. A carrier strike group carrying 6,000 sailors and Marines was positioned 90 miles off the Cuban coast. On April 18th, the same day as the Havana meeting, President Trump told reporters at Mar-a-Lago that military options remained on the table. When a reporter asked if that included military action, he did not say no. Admiral Craig Fowler, head of Southern Command, testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee 3 days earlier. He confirmed the command had updated contingency plans for Cuba across a full range of options. Senator Tom Cotton asked if U.S. forces were ready to act within 30 days. Fowler said yes. Here is the question no one in the diplomatic cable traffic wants to answer out loud. What happens when Cuba does nothing? If the deadline passes and Washington follows through, the template is proven by force. If the deadline passes and Washington does nothing, every future American ultimatum loses credibility instantly. That is why May 1st may matter more to the global order than it does to Havana specifically. Russia issued a statement calling the ultimatum unacceptable. China's foreign ministry said it opposes economic coercion. Neither country has moved a ship, sent a barrel of oil, or extended $1 of credit since the ultimatum was delivered. The Russian tankers that were rerouting Venezuelan oil through back channels in March have not made additional trips since U.S. tracking intensified. 3 vessels were intercepted in international waters off Trinidad. The U.S. did not board them. The message did not need a boarding party. Cuba is more isolated today than at any point since the Cold War ended. The energy crisis that started in January, when Trump's executive order severed Venezuelan oil shipments and pressured Mexico to halt deliveries, produced rolling blackouts of up to 18 hours daily within 3 weeks. Hospitals lost power. Water treatment plants shut down. By February, Cuba was living through its worst energy crisis since the 1990s special period. In March, protests broke out across multiple cities. The largest demonstration ended with hundreds storming the local Communist Party headquarters and setting it on fire. 30 people were detained. Internet was cut across the province for 72 hours. 2 days later, Rubio announced the Havana delegation. Trump said the Cuban people were ready for change. Diaz-Canel said the demands amount to an attack on sovereignty. He is right, and that framing is irrelevant to the 14-day clock, which does not evaluate arguments. It evaluates compliance or non-compliance. The broader question, and this is the one that extends far beyond Cuba, is what this validates as a model. Identify the dependency, eliminate it, apply pressure over months, extract concessions incrementally, then present final terms with a deadline. The target either accepts self-dissolution or faces military options. This same methodology, operated by the same Secretary of State, is currently running in 2 theaters simultaneously, Cuba and Iran. If it works in both, the template is established for every future adversary with a structural vulnerability. We know the delegation met Cuban officials for 3 days and delivered 10 specific demands. We know those demands dissolve the Cuban system of government if implemented. We know the deadline is 14 days. We know a carrier strike group with 6,000 personnel sits 90 miles offshore. We know Southern Command confirmed readiness to act within 30 days. We know Russia and China have expressed concern and delivered nothing. We know Cuba is more isolated than at any point since the Cold War. We know the lights are going out across Havana while the clock counts down. What we do not know is which of 3 outcomes arrives on May 1st. Compliance, which ends the revolution. Rejection, which triggers the next phase. Or silence, which forces Washington to decide whether its ultimatum was real. And here is the question I want you to sit with. Does the outcome depend on what Diaz-Canel decides, or on what the officers around him decide? Because in every government under this kind of terminal pressure, the leader's decision is only as real as the military's willingness to enforce it. Tell me your answer in the comments. The debate already running there is worth reading. If this analysis helped you see past the press conference version of events, hit the like button. It is the single fastest way to get this in front of people tracking Cuba right now. And if you want the daily update the moment the situation moves, not a weekly roundup after the moment has passed, subscribe. We update this daily, and May 1st is coming fast. I will be here the moment the answer arrives.